But for today, the role that we're really focused on for Dominic is a presidential appointment. President Biden appointed Dominic to be the US representative to the APEC Business Advisory Council, otherwise known as ABAC. And of course, that membership comes with serious responsibility this year because the US is hosting APEC in San Francisco in November. So literally, when it comes to the business side, there is no better placed person in the country or the world today to talk about the dynamics of Asia-Pacific economy than Dominic. So welcome, Dominic.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Now, I just, in the audience is the Consul General from my native Australia, Jane Duke, and I just said to Jane, I was going to try to resist the Australian temptation to say that we invented APEC.
That's true.
So I've resisted the temptation, Jane, to say that. But you know, APEC was born in a period of incredible enthusiasm as the world changed from the 1980s to the 1990s and the growth of globalization. And soon after the birth of APEC, ABAC was born, I think 6 years later. And now you have the opportunity to be chair of the council. You know, I think I saw you right at the beginning of your chair year in Bangkok last November. I guess
That's right.
It probably
Yep.
was. So can you give everyone in the audience both a sort of your version of the history of APEC and its role, and then the private sector, public-private engagement through ABAC. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a sort of history lesson from your perspective?
Sure. In fact, before I got appointed, my knowledge of APEC is more like, oh yeah, all these presidents and prime ministers standing together and wearing batik, you know, taking photos, or cowboy boots, whatever, right? So, because that's what got all the media attention. It was interesting because when the White House called me and asked me to consider to take on this chairing ABAC for 2023, and it's like a 3 years appointment, first starting as an incoming chair last year, and then chair this year, and then outgoing chair next year. So the first thing that I asked was, whoa, I got a full-time job, plus, you know, trustee as USC, a bunch of other corporate board and non-profit boards. I'm not sure that
So I don't think I want to ask you about Barbie, but
Yeah.
you're a Mattel guy as well.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Barbie is transforming the Asia-Pacific economy. Maybe it is. I mean,
Well,
sorry, I didn't want to get in the way.
No, it's done really well
history.
all around the world, but didn't do that well in China. So, but well, in fact, I've been on the board of Mattel for 18 years, so been trying to get Barbie to be a great movie, so we finally did it. So I was very pleased with that. But that's a distraction. Get back to APEC. So initially, I was told that my responsibility would be 4 formal meetings a year in these pick, you know, the countries I wanted to go to have meetings. In 3 out of the 4 meetings, and the last meetings, of course, will be in our host country, which is the United States, that when Biden will be hosting the summit, which will be happening in November. So initially, I thought that, well, a week, a year, every quarter doesn't sound too bad. So, but what I found out later was that it was a lot of work, because you know, once I get started, you know, the folks from the State Department, NSC, and Trade Department, Commerce Department, one by one, they all start coming and say, oh, I'm also working on the APEC. By the way, we need to coordinate this, we need to coordinate that. So it's like meetings sort of nonstop. But just a brief information about history about APEC is that it is absolutely the fact that Australia started that in 1989. 1989. Australia took the leadership and started in some sort of informal forum among senior government officials and ministers and of the Asian Pacific.
And it was the first big Asian grouping.
Yep.
Right? Everything else had previously in trade and other things had been very US-Europe focused. This was the first big move to acknowledge the rise of Asia.
And let me just quickly also, I think, to give you some perspective, APEC is 62% of the GDP of the world, over 50% of the trade of the world, and over 40% of the population. So this is huge. I mean, over 62% of the GDP of the world. Quickly, I think 21 economies. It's really countries that touch on the Pacific Ocean, all right? So all the way from the top, Russia, Canada, United States, Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Japan, Korea, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Again, it's only sort of like one of these things that have, I mean, other than Olympic, right? So Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China all together. You know, you don't find that in these other type of arrangement. Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, Thailand, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand.
That's so impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an impressive group, but it's even more impressive that you could name them all. I could see you were looking on the map.
I just go from top and then counting it down. You know, like so it really touched on from North, you know, the North America, you know, Latin America, you know, all the way to, you know, East Asia, Southeast Asia.
But back then, you know, the world was doing a bunch, or we were starting that period of a whole bunch of free trade agreements.
Yep.
But APEC was less formal than that. The EC is economic cooperation, right? So
yep, and then it was in 1993 that President Clinton formalized APEC and start making sure that it's not just a ministerial, like senior ministers and government officials meeting, but actually leaders
meeting,
of these economy will get together annually, and they rotate in terms of hosting the annual summit. So it's 1993 that was established by President Clinton. And then in 1995, the leaders, while having meetings in the summit, they recognized that without counsel and guidance and advice from the business sector, from the private sectors, they would never be able to come up with a more effective, you know, like solutions in terms of trade and all the other sort of like challenges that are facing, or challenges and opportunities facing the APEC economies.
And the business leaders on APEC, I mean, this is like you, this is very senior people, big CEOs of big companies in the APEC economies join APEC, right?
Well, each country may have a little bit different spin on it, but I think by and large are all business leaders that really have a very diverse knowledge about how to help these leaders to tackle the challenges that we're facing and also identify opportunities that we can take advantage of. Now, so the way it works is that each economy leader will pick 3 business representatives. So the way it works is we have 21 economies, so 21 leaders, you know, whether they're president or prime ministers, and each of them will pick 3 business leaders to represent APEC. So it will be 63, basically 63 of us, you know, APEC members, and then 21, you know, APEC leaders. The way it works is that the APEC, which I chair, we have 4 formal meetings a year. Like, for example, this year, I picked Auckland, New Zealand as the first meeting. And the second meeting, we were in Brunei in April. Third meeting was Cebu, Philippines. And the fourth meeting will be, our finale will be in San Francisco, where the APEC Summit would take place. And in between, you know, the senior government officials of APEC also have their meetings. And they picked Honolulu, Palm Springs, Detroit, and Seattle, and then the last meeting also will be in Seattle. So, no, not in Seattle, in San Francisco. So the way it works is that these meetings were all for the purpose of getting the Business Advisory Council working together, also with the senior government official, that we collaborate and focusing on the themes of this year. And then the Business Advisory Council will then put together a report of recommendations that we will formally submit to the leaders. And then in November, while the leaders having their summit and private meetings, the APEC members will actually have a private dialogue to present the report and talk about the purpose of why we think that it is important for the leaders to consider our recommendations.
So there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. Yeah. Geopolitics seems to be dominating a lot of the business and economics news, but you've got a group of private sector leaders in APEC. Can you share with us some of the big themes that you see? I don't know whether it's premature to do that. No. You've still got a couple of months, but
our theme for 2023, actually we have two themes. The APEC, the Business Advisory Council, we have our theme, basically it's called equity, sustainability, and opportunity. And then the senior government officials that represent the government for APEC, their theme is creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. Now, if you sort of like reflect on these two themes, it's very complementary, right? They are looking for a resilient and sustainable future for all, for everybody. And we're talking about equity, sustainability, and opportunity. So in a sense, the purpose of this year is that when we look at APEC, maybe back in the earlier stage of APEC, there was a lot more focus on, WTO, free trade agreement, and oftentimes a lot of those trade agreement or investment opportunities cater more for the multinational corporations. And to a certain extent, there are small business or local indigenous community may possibly suffer as collateral damage. One we can look at, for example, with the technology advancement, you have companies, for example, like Amazon, who've done extraordinarily well and create incredible convenience for all of us. We all order from Amazon. But next thing happened, all these little bookstores down in every corner got taken out, right? So what we're trying to do in 2023 is that we really wanted to make sure that there are some big issues that we need to deal with. Obviously economic integration, trade agreement, that's important. But let's make sure this trade agreement have some sort of balance.
So this is clearly an enormous shift in the world. And certainly the arc of APEC reflects that. So, I can't remember who was the author of there was you remember a famous economics article called Growth is Good. And the argument was that, listen, economic growth is the number one thing, and then it'll just trickle down. And so now we say, actually, that's not necessarily true. Growth may be good, but we need growth to be inclusive. And then the second criticism, which obviously is a very poignant one in more emerging economies, is growth also tends to increase emissions because growth comes with urbanization and manufacturing. So if we move from this growth is good to growth needs to be inclusive and sustainable, what are the actionable steps there to make that possible? You recognize small business, but how do you, recognizing is one thing, changing the environment is another.
Absolutely, because that's what we, at the Business Advisory Council, we set up these working groups. We're focusing on, The working groups, we have one area is on the economic integration, which continue to focus on trade, investment, and whatnot, but making sure that there will be that balance. And then the other working group is on sustainability. So we identify projects that help to deal with climate change, but then we don't want to just keep focusing on climate change and ignore the fact that sometimes these great climate change projects can kill a lot of small business or hurt local communities. How do we create balance? And then we also wanted to make sure that, that's going back to, besides equity, is opportunity. We don't want to always look at is that any digital innovation or any kind of sustainable opportunities or economic integration opportunities are always going to be bad for small business, folks that in the lower income area and things like that. What we're trying to do is that why can't we find opportunities for them? For example, we have specific initiative for helping women business, helping indigenous business, helping what we call MSME, which is micro, small, medium enterprises business. The idea is that, a small business entrepreneur, a very small business owner in a place like maybe Bandung, Indonesia, if she's able to figure out how to use the internet effectively, can actually turn her own business into a global business instead of just running around in the same neighborhood to trying to sell a few pieces. So we are really pushing hard to promote that using digital innovation and not to hurt business, but to help the small business to get bigger. And then same thing for sustainability projects. And yeah, a lot of them requires maybe big business to come in to build big projects and whatnot. But the fact is, actually, small business can also participate and maybe make the best out of it. But it requires government, recognition of that balance and require business to come up with these innovative solutions. And those are the kind of things that we have sort of like at least 20, 30 different projects going on sustainability idea. And it's not just sustainability in terms of related to having solar, electrical battery, hydrogen and all this stuff, but it's also food sustainability, right? The BioCircular Green Initiative, and oftentimes it's dealing with farmers. How do we become more sort of sustainable from a biocircular, direction? And all these different ideas, we are so fortunate, whether it's coming out from Singapore or New Zealand, Australia, or sometimes, like all Indonesia taking a big push and say that we are going to take a huge initiative of cleaning up the ocean, cleaning up, in certain, farming areas. And those are kind of really great things happening. And the other things about APEC is that I'm very fortunate. My first reaction was I was concerned about, whoa, with all this geopolitical tension, it's going to be a tough job to be the chair. I walked in and I nominated even the business representative from China as the chair of the sustainability working group. Every single person from different economy working closely with him and coming with all kinds of solutions. All kinds of solutions. I have the Canadian chair that runs the digital innovation, and we very aggressively talk about the cybersecurity concern. And again, every single business representatives in APEC are dealing with that issue. And we've been coming up with MSME toolkit to help the small business to put software in to fight against cybersecurity and sharing these ideas and together.
So this is I'm looking at Carl Voigt, who's in the audience. This must be a proud parent moment for you, because Dominic, that Carl has been working with teams of our MBAs who've written reports for APEC on many of the topics that you've just articulated, and in particular, the one that's always struck me is the impact of new technology on rural communities, on the lives of women, on economic opportunity, right? This is so far away from the world of multinational corporations, as you said, but certainly ABAC's been important there, and where I think you are a proud parent, Carl, that so many of our students have contributed. And of course, when I saw you in Bangkok, I was thrilled. I got to see our students kill it in terms of their presentation to you and the rest of the group.
And that was a proud moment because the first day that I attended the APEC meeting last year in Ha Long Bay, Vietnam. And so during the discussion, this USC Marshall School report came out. And I said, isn't that interesting? Last year, the only school that actually were actively involved helping APEC to come up with a solution was USC. Not all the other schools. USC was the only school last year. And so, in fact, that's why at the APEC Summit in Bangkok, which Thailand hosted last year, you were there, and the students made a very, very impressive presentation. So I even sent a picture to Carol Folt and said, hey, you ought to be proud of the school. So maybe you can share with me about how did USC get involved? And for all these, because I've heard that USC has always been involved.
This guy in the third row has. We should talk about, but it is. I mean, we believe. I mean, we believe, and I think the school has believed for a very long time that the kind of conceptual stuff and theory that you learn in the classroom comes alive in the real world. So action-oriented learning is so important. And our students just get motivated. I always underline the word real. Real projects, real time, real impact. There's nothing that our students won't do. And I think this APEC example is a perfect embodiment of that. It's not the only one. I mean, sustainable and inclusive growth. You've mentioned Indonesia a few times. We have a new project where we sent 20 undergraduates to far-flung parts of Indonesia to work on sustainability initiatives in pineapple plantations. Indonesia's how many islands spread over all these time zones? I mean, massively high impact for our students, but we also, the reason they're so motivated is they know they're having an impact in the real world. And so this is the kind of partnership that we want to have more of. So proud parent moment. Back to your characterization of APEC versus APEC and the leaders meeting, the word that struck me in your rendering of the leaders meeting was resilience, which has clearly became an incredibly important term in the COVID environment. Yep. But I think a lot of business people all around the world are worried that resilience might also be an excuse to be a little more protectionist, to focus less on economic integration and more on building barriers. You work with the Biden administration and the president. With the administration obviously has a really difficult line to walk here between investing in the United States, the CHIPS Act, IRA, and the like, but also promoting the international economy and international business. So what's your understanding of how the Biden administration hopes to walk that balance line in the context of the APEC meeting?
Well, I do feel that at the APEC meeting, I think the theme really is to continue to focusing on more collaboration with the APEC regions, economies, and the priority is sustainable growth. And on top of that, I think that this whole idea about creating the balance. When I say creating balance is that I think what we see in the United States today is that it's no longer like so long it is globalization, and then everything is good. I think there is a lot more of that balance. But so coming from like Catherine Tai, our trade rep, and she repeatedly emphasized the message at APEC meeting of, well, whatever the trade agreement, it has to be beneficial to the local laborers. So to that extent, there is the balance. So it is, it's not easy. It's not easy, to create a free trade zone and somehow it all worked out for the laborers. And then the new things that we are dealing with right now, we're actively engaging with, is the generative AI, right? How would artificial intelligence, not necessarily just from a governance point of view, but also to what extent that will replace laborers. And this is a tough challenge here. And we just started addressing this issue from APEC, but we have no conclusion today. I'm going to have to punt it down to the next chair.
So that, I mean, the AI issue obviously has many dimensions, but I've been struck being in emerging economies in the, whatever it is now, the 10 months since ChatGPT, that for anyone who has a large call center economy, and for countries like the Philippines, as you know, that's an enormous amount of employment. AI looks existential, right? That machines will be able to do a better job on call centers than humans. So how do you balance, the world is about balance, how do you balance the opportunity there with the potential dislocation?
Well, that's why with these sort of like major technological advancement, now government and both, public and private sectors have to work together with this partnership and find way to help pivot. And then in anticipation of this major sort of like movement that would affect the laborers. I was in Cebu, Philippines. This is like a epicenter of call centers. And President Marcos Jr. was telling me, he said that, how good we are? Most of these calls that you're doing probably is going to be happening here in Cebu, right? And you're absolutely right. How would that, that the AI would affect these labor forces. So to a certain degree, somehow the business leaders there will have to figure out a way and be like 4 or 5 years ahead of the curve and start pivoting. What other business can they do, right? One of the advantages that Philippines has is that the ability, that language capability of English-speaking country, that a lot of people are speaking, that can speak very good English. And then if it's not call center, what else can they do, right? So those are kind of things that I think that the business leaders, which including the APEC members, have to continue to stay engaged and figure out these solutions. And when we talk about our working groups, working together and come up with solutions, and really cover all different areas. And it's not just, specifically for trade, and we try, and we're doing our best, whether the leaders will adopt all our recommendation or not, that's, of course, it's up to them. But our position is that we continue to promote, like, paperless trade. We continue to promote interoperability of, like, whether it's digital currency. We're trying to recommend, like, a interoperability of digital currency.
And in the digital currency world, you're thinking about central bank digital currencies,
absolutely.
not Bitcoin.
Not Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that it's not appropriate. I guess every country has its own rule, but then what we're trying to promote is central bank digital currency. Yeah.
So let's go. I have two sort of more macro questions about the interaction between the economy and ABAC and APEC. So one is just continue the supply chains. When we talk resilience, we tend to be thinking supply chain. there's clearly a move today to decenter supply chains, not be as reliant on one supplier. Everyone now sees that was a mistake. I presume that's creating a lot of opportunity in the APEC economies, but how's that going from your perspective? How is business navigating that environment?
It's evolving, because clearly for the last 20 plus years or so, the developed countries' focus have always been looking at China as the hub for centralized place for supply chain, and China have built a very, very strong infrastructure and the manufacturing capability and whatnot. And with the current geopolitical issues, so it's not just U.S. business or a European business and whatnot start looking at other alternatives, but also Chinese business, the major manufacturers in China are also started looking at Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia as the sort of like a supporting hub to help them to continue to sort of like stay involved with the business. So these are all happening just the last few years. I would say at this point it's a bit too early to claim while it is going really smooth and well, and because obviously it's not that easy. I mean, the reason why some of these other countries were not, the major suppliers was because infrastructure or some of the other, or either labor's infrastructure are not quite up to par, and they're building that. They're building that slowly, gradually building that. And I see that, manufacturers in China that are now already sort of like put their plant in from Vietnam to Thailand are working diligently and trying to make those hubs work well. And it's the same thing that whether it's US or Taiwan business that are continuing to stay engaged with Southeast Asia countries, or even Mexico, right?
Was it a big deal that President Biden upped, had some fanfare a couple of days ago in Hanoi, upping the standing of the relationship between the U.S. and Vietnam?
Yeah, I think Vietnam is one of the primary beneficiaries of the geopolitical tension for the last few years, because the Vietnamese economy have really picked up substantially because of the foreign investments going to Vietnam, and it's getting to be a very much sought after alternative at this point. I think the government and the local business will need to continue to step up, to build the appropriate infrastructure and make sure they have the right, not only just the laborers, but also, to effectively run the business, you have to have the floor managers, and the engineers, and all of that sort of labor's, resources and need to put in place. And I do feel that it is going to get better and better.
And you mentioned, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the opportunity for Mexico in this environment. I mean, in addition to its proximity to the United States, in a lot of the recent American legislation, Mexico counts from an economic standpoint as if it's part of the American market. So how do you see that one playing out?
Well, we saw substantial growth in Mexico back in the 80s when Japanese, maquiladora, the Japanese business all, moving many of the, again, geopolitical issue between Japan and United States back in the 80s. So, and that's how create great opportunity for Mexico, that Japanese car manufacturers start building manufacturing plants in Japan, in Mexico, and start exporting cars from Mexico to the United States. And what I'm seeing right now is also China are also investing heavily in Mexico. And then they're also looking at Mexico as another sort of like hub to help them to export, their goods to United States. So this kind of natural transition is taking place. I think, again, Mexico has its own, sometimes political challenge here and there, and they need to work that out. And if they can do that, and it would be a very, very great opportunity for its nation to really, build up the economy in a big way.
So the other macro issue, I was just thinking about your comparison, Makiadora, the comparison between Japan in the 80s and where we are today. Back then, of course, I think it was at the Plaza Accords, Japan agreed to double the value of the yen against the dollar almost overnight, transforming international economic interactions. But I would have thought today, for many countries in APEC, strong dollar plus high U.S. interest rates is a real challenge. How are your fellow business leaders viewing that, both the interest rate environment and the strength of the dollar? Hard for them, right, on lots of dimensions.
Absolutely. I mean, if I look at it, if I just talk about selfishly, as East West Bank CEO, oh, this is great. Well, record earnings, with this high interest rate, we're doing great, right? But I think for the economy, it's absolutely not good, not only in U.S., but globally. This high rate environment, I think that caused business to hesitate to make investment. Everyone worries about, well, would it be 12 months from now, would it be 18 months from now that recession will come if rates stay in this high level? So the lack of investments, I think that ultimately will hurt economy. And it's not just in the United States. Throughout the APEC region, that the folks that I talk to at my APEC membership, and all of them will worry about this high rate environment. So everyone's hoping that rate will come down, but we all recognize that, yeah, inflation is high, and the Federal Reserve Bank only have 1 tool. The only thing that they can make decision on independently without having to listen to anybody is to, either increase interest rate or drop interest rate, right? I wish they have more tools that they can work with, but because that's the only tools that is available for them, so the only thing they can do is to maintain the rate high. Seems to be working somewhat decently because we see the unemployment rate, I mean, it just, inch up a little bit, and inflation seems to tame down a little bit, but it's not going as well to cause the Fed to feel comfortable to drop the rate back down. I think that if Fed fund rate does not come down to that, 3% on that level, it's going to be tough because to think that people can actually afford to buy a home at a 7.5% interest rate, or home equity line now is like 8.75 or even more. Just to me, it just doesn't make sense. Now, one can argue and say that, well, if you remember Jimmy Carter's day, interest rate
20%, right?
20%,
yeah.
right? They said that's how we lived, but it wasn't pretty, right?
So that's mostly the domestic story. This summer, I'm sure I've certainly interacted with people who said it was a great time to be a tourist in Europe because the dollar was going a long way. But do you get is the strong dollar, as opposed to interest rates, is the strong dollar an issue in APEC, or are people have learned to live in a world where exchange rates move around a lot?
Well, whether it's high interest rates, strong dollars, all are issues. But whatever that is, I think that each economy have to figure out a way to how to do the best they can. And then, but at my APEC meeting, clearly I hear all kinds of complaints or whining. It was interesting that it's not just the APEC members sometimes mistakenly think that I can actually make a decision for this country. Obviously not, right? But sometimes even talking to the leaders, because every time I host APEC meeting in one of these different nations, the leaders always show up, and at the make the opening remarks, and then sometimes even participate in a gala dinner, and then occasionally they'll say that, why don't you talk to Biden about buying more? We have been buying all these Boeing planes, and maybe he can do more here. I said, it's not like I can actually make a difference.
So I want everyone to know that even though I dropped my notes, I can remember what I wanted to ask Dominic, and I want to thank people. It's okay, I don't need them. It's very kind of you. I'll see if I don't need them. I've been weaving in some of the questions that people submitted when they registered for the event, and the most frequently recurring one was one you've already addressed, which is the sort of growth plus inclusivity plus sustainability as this big theme. And I think you did a really great job of articulating how that might work well below the level of large multinational corporations. But the second topic, no surprise that people were interested in, is all these D words that we're using at the moment. Deglobalization became decoupling, is now de-risking. What's your take on that? At both levels, I think, both as a CEO in the US, but also in your leadership role in APEC. I mean, when Bob Hawke founded APEC, there was so much optimism about the global economy, and probably in the last 5 years, and then accentuated in COVID, everyone thought, no, this global is a bit too risky. So where are we in that process? How do you feel we're navigating it? What's the path forward?
First of all, I think for the Business Advisory Council, APEC, and it's unanimous among all of us that collaboration is the key. And even APEC, because one of the things that I feel pretty good about what I achieved this year is that in the past, maybe APEC and APEC senior government officials may not be as aligned as closely. And they do their own meetings, we do our own meetings, and then we just get together in November, and then in the leaders' dialogue. But there's not much interaction. When I was from Vietnam to Bangkok, I noticed that there was not as much interaction. I made a decision that this year I'm going to work with our APEC senior officials from the NSC and the State Department, and making sure that we are always working closely together, we are aligned with the same theme, same purpose. And so far, both APEC senior officials and also APEC members all thinking about we need to collaborate more. In fact, this whole thing about decoupling, this is mainly from somewhat of a, maybe these political expert or maybe media. Because even coming from Janet Yellen didn't say that U.S. wanted to decouple, or President Biden didn't say that we want to decouple, right? That there are certain, specific, issues that U.S. looking at our own self-interest that we need to do. But in terms of decoupling, that's not the direction that is going. So it's really competition and collaboration, trying to figure out a way to how to compete, and then also in the meantime, if there is a place we can collaborate, we'll collaborate. If there are places we need to compete, we'll compete. Hopefully, it does not get out of control. I mean, that's what I think is the direction that's going. From the APEC standpoint, it's one of those, the other side of competition is that APEC is that forum that's all about collaboration.
Right, the C is for cooperation in APEC.
There you go.
Yeah, and I would imagine that for business leaders, right, you play the hand you're dealt, but there are a whole bunch of new opportunities. I mean, you've mentioned some of them. The sort of diversification of supply chains creates opportunities for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the supply chain area, there's opportunities for, for a change. Many of the other developing nations now have the opportunity to be part of it, right? Because frankly, if we continue like what we had, U.S. continue, if Walmart keep buying everything from China, there's nothing much for Vietnam or Indonesia and Malaysia and whatnot. But when we start seeing some of these diversification, and not over-concentration in one particular nation, and then now suddenly we were able to spread the benefit to all the other nations. And it's good because now they also, like, obviously Indonesia are stepping up, taking on some strong leadership about climate change issue last year in Bangkok. Prime Minister in Bangkok, initiate this biocircular green pledge that every single one of the leaders at APEC sign on with the same pledge. This initiated by Thailand, right? So these are all great things. But if they are like just constantly just looking for food and shelter, they're not going to be talking about saving the world.
Yeah, no, so, I mean, I was just amazed. I saw a report yesterday that confidently predicted that even with all of the growth that's happening in the emerging world, total global fossil fuel consumption is going to peak like next year. I mean, and this has been clearly a global effort. So we've just got a couple of minutes, Dominic. A lot of big topics we've been talking about. Let me just end on I'd like to get a window into your life. You're running this massive business. You're doing these enormously important now quasi-diplomatic role for the U.S. government. You're a trustee at USC. You're on a bunch of corporate boards. What's your approach to managing your own time? And in particular, how do you just not run on empty all the time, given all the demands on you? I mean, and my joke about you must have been a baby when you started was only half in jest. I mean, looking good, sounding good, doing all of these incredible things. How do you make it all work? How do you prioritize stuff? How do you keep balance in your life?
Well, I mean, to take on that much responsibility, balancing life, I mean, it's a matter of perspective. So I looked at it as that from my job requirement, that is pretty much work. I stop always. Once at 12:30 a.m., I'm going to bed.
It's a cruel thing about right. It's a cruel thing about time zones. Yeah. Somebody is always working.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, emails coming to me all different places. Yeah. But 12:30 a.m., I'm going to bed, and then when I got up in the morning at 6:30, I start going again, right? Which to me, like a lot of people say, oh, so sad. But I looked at it as that actually it's a lot of fun doing my work. My like East West Bank is extraordinarily fun because otherwise I couldn't, be the CEO for the last 32 years in this place because we continue to grow. We continue to get involved with many different industries. One of my senior executives here, Bennett Purcell, he joined us 12 years ago and started entertainment practice, and boom, and then we've done extraordinarily well in Hollywood, right? And then he moved on digital media and started doing these video games and then all these other stuff, right? So stuff that I didn't have much exposure. But when we kept growing and we building additional industry expertise from healthcare to life science, high tech, e-commerce, entertainment, clean energy. All of these stuff that we're working on, fascinating for me. To get paid, then actually get involved with all these stuff. I thought that this will be something that will require at least $60,000 tuition a year, but it's not, right? And I looked at it as that sometimes when you run into a situation that you are fortunate to have the opportunity to take on some meaningful responsibility, and I'll just make the best out of it.
So it's the old cliche, what keeps you up at night? Being excited about the next day, right? That's the reality. So look, so I think it's evident to everybody here that the US and the whole APEC region are so fortunate to have you playing this leadership role. So I want to wish you all the best for your last meeting in your second year in San Francisco, and thank you, thank you for everything you do for the community, for USC, for the country and the world. You're a really special person. So thanks for joining some time with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And